Let's go live with my parents starting today. They're my parents, so there shouldn't be any problem, right? My husband surprised me with this idea out of the blue. I was shocked and almost cried because I never expected it. Isn't this too sudden? My dad just passed away, and it's only been a few days since his funeral. I'm still grieving his loss after he fought a long battle with illness. Despite all the sadness from the funeral, my husband decided we should leave our home. We headed to a villa my dad left for me. When we got there, I found out my in-laws were already there, staying in the villa. My name is Natalie, and I'm 33 years old. I work as a designer and have recently started living on my own. I've been married to Justin for 3 years now. My career is going well, and I'm known as a good designer. I earn a decent salary, and the apartment is in my name. My mom passed away when I was in college, and last year, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. He was getting treatment, but it got worse, and he eventually passed away. The doctor told us to prepare for the worst. My dad was really important to me. When I found out he was sick, I was devastated. Watching him get sicker each day, I couldn't sleep because I was so worried and anxious. What did the doctor say about your dad's sickness? Is he getting any better? Should I, as your husband, go see him? My husband kept asking about my dad's health, but I didn't feel like he really cared. It seemed like he was just waiting for my dad to pass away. Before, my husband used to feel insecure because he earned less money than me. I wished he would be proud of my accomplishments and support me during tough times. But instead, he acted childish, always trying to compete with me and wanting to be better than me. My dad told us not to worry about him and to focus on our time together as a couple. But I think we should visit him while we still can. That way, we won't regret it later. I started to dislike my husband more and more. In the beginning of our marriage, I felt a lot of love from him, and we were happy together. But now, his insensitive comments about my dad's illness were too much to handle. I realized that the loving husband I once knew had changed, and it was hard for me to accept. My husband works from home. I planned to work from home too after becoming independent, but he said having someone around distracted me, so I rented a small office and started commuting. Even though the hospital was nearby for me, my husband stayed home all day, leaving all the chores for me to do. I had to juggle work, taking care of my dad, and coming home tired to find a mess my husband made in dishes he hadn't cleaned. He only cared about himself and didn't consider my feelings. Living with him made me realize how little he understood me, and I felt very lonely. After my father passed away, we had already sold our family home as we had discussed with him before. I was busy with funeral preparations until we headed to the funeral hall. But my husband seemed more focused on phone calls or disappearing than helping me. Justin, please help me, especially now. I pleaded with him, but he brushed it off, saying he had work calls to attend to. My frustration with my husband grew as he seemed distant and disinterested during this tough time. His attitude had changed, and he appeared colder than before, leaving me feeling even more sad and isolated. On the day of the funeral, he spent a lot of time chatting with his parents, and their smirks and the looks from others made me feel even more alone. Despite the smooth handling of the funeral procedures, my husband suddenly suggested that we move in with his parents. He said it casually, almost as a joke, but I couldn't believe he would suggest such a thing, especially after the loss of my father. Live together where? We don't have any spare rooms in this apartment, I countered, reminding him that our apartment was already quite full, with one room used for his work materials. Then he mentioned the villa I had inherited from my father. I was taken aback. That villa held special memories of my father, and I wasn't ready to let go of it. But my husband seemed unconcerned about my feelings and continued to push for his parents to move in. Despite my objections, his parents had already made plans to move, and there seemed to be no room for negotiation. Whenever I spoke up, my husband didn't seem to like it. He accused me of being selfish and said I'd neglected our home because of my father's illness and frequent visits. His words were harsh, and they made me feel like my world was crumbling. Now that your father is gone, you need to listen to me, he said coldly. He complained that my father's illness had dragged on for too long and that it had been hard on him too. His lack of empathy for my father and me hurt deeply. I remembered how much pain my father had endured during his illness, and I knew he wouldn't have wanted me to just do whatever my husband said. At that moment, any love I had for my husband seemed to disappear. It hurt even more to realize that my husband was more focused on getting the villa than grieving my father's death. Despite my warnings, my husband was determined to move his parents into the villa. I decided to go along with it, but I couldn't hide my sadness. I packed only the essentials and left our home, telling my husband I would come back for the rest later. I couldn't bear to exchange any more words with him. It was painful to see my in-laws moving into the villa, seemingly without any consideration for my feelings. But I followed my husband silently, refusing to accept that my special place would be taken over by his selfish desires. Even though it's technically called a villa, it's just a regular house by the sea, located in a normal neighborhood where people lead ordinary lives. But it's conveniently close to the city center, and the land it sits on is valuable. As I stepped out of the train station, memories of my childhood flooded back. I remembered when my mother was still alive, and after I fell asleep on the train, my father would carry me home on his back. The sight of the familiar scenery brought back those bittersweet memories. When we got to the villa, my in-laws were already there. I felt suspicious because it seemed like my husband had secretly given them a key without telling me. The idea that they had planned to move in without anyone knowing made me even more uneasy. Inside the villa, my in-laws seemed excited about their future life there. They admired the sturdy furniture my father had chosen, which had a slightly different European style, probably influenced by my mother's taste. They couldn't stop praising the villa, saying how perfect it was and how lucky they were to live there now instead of our cramped apartment. They seemed to completely overlook the fact that my father had passed away and only saw the villa as a luxurious house. My husband joined in with their insensitive comments, laughing as they toasted the move with beers. I sighed deeply as I prepared some snacks, feeling frustrated and alone. As I observed my husband and in-laws, memories of precious moments with my parents at the dining table felt tarnished. Despite my discomfort, I decided to keep my feelings to myself and endure the night. However, the next morning, the peaceful atmosphere of the villa was shattered by my mother-in-law's loud scream. I quickly realized something must have gone wrong. As I woke up, I saw my father-in-law and husband fussing around, while I took a moment to reach the source of the commotion. In the bathroom, my mother-in-law was on the floor, holding her foot in distress. "The floor just collapsed beneath me," she gasped, clearly shaken by the sudden incident. My husband and father-in-law didn't seem to understand what had happened, insisting that the floor looked fine. They checked the spot she pointed to, but the floorboards appeared smooth and undamaged. Despite this, my mother-in-law was convinced that the floor had given way. Seeing their confusion, I suggested, "Have you tried stepping on that part of the floor with a slightly different color?" All three of them were taken aback and focused their attention on that spot. Stepping forward, I used my slippered foot to press on the differently colored section. Well, what was that? The floorboard made a clear sound and slightly sank when I stepped on it, but it snapped back into place the moment I lifted my foot. If someone stepped on it unknowingly, they'd surely think the floor had collapsed. See, the floor sinks a bit. It's kind of like a trap. Wait, that's dangerous. Is there something wrong with this house? My explanation seemed to surprise and worry them. I calmly clarified, "It's not a problem with the house. My father intentionally installed it like this." "Why on earth would he do that?" they asked, puzzled. "It's a feature of what you might call a mechanical mansion or a trick house. You see, my father was a big fan of ninjas. This villa was his pride and joy, and he loved adding all sorts of clever mechanisms to it. As a child, I often watched him work on the house, adjusting its mechanisms or adding new ones. That's why there are traps and clever mechanisms all over the villa. A shelf you shouldn't touch, a floorboard that drops when stepped on, a door that only opens in a specific way, hidden doors, and even secret rooms. This villa is a testament to my father's dreams and ingenuity, developed over many years. While I, having grown up visiting and learning from my father how to operate all the traps, have no trouble navigating them. It's a different story for my husband and in-laws, who are unfamiliar with them. I did warn you that living in this villa would be challenging. I also told you it's a place filled with memories of my father. My father's intense ninja obsession is well known among our relatives. It's surprising that you didn't know about it. My husband claimed he hadn't heard. But now he was speechless. My in-laws were equally stunned by this revelation. With our apartment lease already canceled and nowhere else to go, they looked to my husband for guidance. Amidst this, both my father-in-law and husband accidentally triggered another trap, causing them to fall. Seeing them on the ground, I couldn't help but chuckle. "Feel free to stay as long as you like," I said, though my tone was more sarcastic than sincere. They had been dazzled by the villa's luxury, ignoring my warnings and showing no interest in my father's hobbies. Now, their oversight was catching up to them. Even explaining the dangers of the traps fell on deaf ears. "This isn't a big deal. We'll get used to it," my husband responded confidently. Acknowledging his comment, I said, "I'll head back to the apartment to prepare for our move." However, in reality, I had no moving preparations. I planned to take a few days off and spend time sorting through my father's belongings. As expected, after just 2 days, my husband and in-laws had had enough. During that brief time alone, I found comfort in solitude and began to see things in a more positive light, making plans for my future. Before long, my father's villa became a small tourist attraction in the neighborhood. It was regularly featured in local newsletters as the trick mansion hidden in our residential area. When the villa was occupied, curious people would come to visit, drawn by the intriguing tricks. Looking back, I remembered seeing strangers touring the villa and local kids playing around, making it a lively spot. My father had listed both the villas and our old home's phone numbers in the newsletters. However, since our family home was sold and it's numbered inactive, all inquiries came to the villa's number. Thanks to my upbringing, I was able to handle calls from foreign visitors who didn't speak our language, but my husband and in-laws couldn't understand foreign languages at all. On top of dealing with the stress of constantly worrying about the traps, they were also overwhelmed by unexpected visitors and handling calls in languages they didn't understand. Exhausted and sleep-deprived, they stumbled back to the apartment. Why don't we all live in this apartment together? Think about it. They had hoped for my father's passing to take over the villa, only to give it up after just 2 days. Instead of offering them tea, I handed my husband the divorce papers, already filled out and stamped. "There's no way we can live together from now on. If you understand, please leave quietly," I said with a deep sigh. My main reason was that I couldn't forgive him for disregarding my feelings and acting insensitively without discussing it with me or giving any explanation. My husband had made the decision for us to live with his parents, and he had never shared household responsibilities with me before. He left all the chores to me and seemed indifferent to my feelings. He acted selfishly and secretly decided to move in with his parents. I couldn't see myself continuing to live with someone like that. "What happened? You used to love me, right?" My husband's question, filled with his usual cluelessness, made me laugh. "Do you think I could love someone who wished for my beloved father's death and would rejoice when he passed?" I handed him the divorce papers and drove the 3 of them out of the apartment. "First of all, this is my apartment. If anyone has a problem, it should be you leaving." My husband raised his voice, not caring about the neighbors, but I stayed calm. "Natalie, I'll call the police for trespassing. If you don't want that, leave quietly. Remember, this apartment is under my name." Their silence followed my words. They depended on me financially and had little of their own. However, I had already decided to cut ties before they could try to persuade me otherwise. Neither my husband nor my in-laws had much in savings. After being kicked out of the apartment and unable to return to the villa, they now live in a cheap, low-quality apartment and are struggling to make ends meet. The previous apartment was better. This was a sentiment my husband and in-laws often repeated. At first, my husband felt guilty and apologized frequently. However, as time passed, he became increasingly resentful of his parents. They were rarely able to hold down jobs due to their age, and when they did work, it didn't last long. Eventually, they depleted their savings and pension with each move, leading to constant arguments and a strained family relationship. The walls of the apartment were thin, so their daily quarrels were easily heard by neighbors. Even when they received noise complaints, they didn't apologize. Instead, they reacted defensively, causing them to become disliked by their neighbors. It seemed like they might need to find a new place to live soon. While my husband used to enjoy working from home, the current apartment didn't provide the luxury of a dedicated workspace. Unable to focus on his job, his reputation and sales suffered. Now, he barely makes ends meet with a late-night convenience store job and may need to consider taking on multiple part-time jobs. The in-laws realized their biggest mistake was allowing their son to control their decisions. In their frequent arguments, my husband and in-laws often blamed the villa's traps. If you had been more responsible, we wouldn't be in this situation. You should have checked properly. Don't blame me now. She's the one who kept important things secret. Shut up. If you had communicated properly with your father, this wouldn't have happened. I never imagined we'd end up like this because of our son. Yet they had always wished to inherit the villa and were overjoyed when my father passed away. I will never forget that. After the divorce, I made significant strides in my career as a designer. To cope with my father's death and all these events, I created designs incorporating ninja elements and shared them on social media. Their popularity grew rapidly, and one day, a major cosmetics company reached out to me. To my surprise, they wanted me to design packaging with an Asian touch, incorporating ninja elements. I felt this work would honor my father's cherished memories. Of course, I eagerly accepted the project and poured myself into it. In the end, it was a huge success. This opportunity catapulted my career forward, allowing me to share joyful updates at my parents' graves. I've kept the mechanical house, preserving it as a special place filled with memories of my father. I began organizing tour schedules and, with a few adjustments, transformed it into a space where both tourists and local children could enjoy for free. Soon, the house garnered significant media attention, bringing in much-needed income to cover ongoing expenses. Additionally, online articles about the house were translated into foreign languages, garnering support from international fans, including elderly individuals who shared my father's passion for ninjas. I'm committed to maintaining this magical place for years to come. Meanwhile, the mechanical house remains a bustling hub of activity, particularly popular among local children. Is this the legendary mechanical house I've heard about? Where are the tricks? Show us. With the help of local volunteers, precautions are taken to ensure the children play safely. Foreign tourists are often amazed by features like the hidden floorboard doors. Wow, this is incredible. I'm so moved to experience such a unique place. What other tricks are here? Despite losing my father and going through a divorce over the inheritance of the villa, I believe the gains have outweighed the losses. The villa has transformed into a memory-filled destination shared with loved ones. Personally, I've undergone a profound transformation, moving forward with renewed optimism and hope.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, "I'm very sorry." Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, "Get his boss here immediately." It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. "What is that idiot doing?" "All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next." Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. "If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you." I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. "Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize." Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? "I'm very sorry." Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. but it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hope to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.